The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the stink of cheap aftershave and stale cigarettes. Then, a heavy feeling in my chest, a mix of anger, hurt, and the cold, hard truth of what had happened. The last thing I remembered. The company I'd poured my heart and soul into, ripped away from me by my best friend and the woman I was going to marry. Evelyn's face, as she walked away with the man who had betrayed me, saying, "Logan, you have nothing left. I can't stay with a man who has no future." The cold metal of a gun against my head. The cruel laughter of the man who had taken everything. The gunshot. But I wasn't dead. I was here. Back in time. Back before they stabbed me in the back. Before everything crumbled. Back when Evelyn was still my girlfriend. Only now I knew exactly what she was going to do. This time, when she chose her own ambition over our love, when she walked away to be with a man she thought would give her riches. That man would be working for me. It wasn't a dream. The cheap, worn-out furniture, the flickering neon sign outside the window, casting a sickly green glow on the stained walls. This was my old apartment, the one I lived in before I had any real success, the one Evelyn always subtly complained about. I sat up, my head pounding, and ran a hand over my face. I felt younger, less burdened physically, but carrying a weight inside that my younger self never knew. I looked at the date on my phone, 1 year before everything went to hell. 1 year before Evelyn's carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing the cold, calculating woman underneath. 1 year before Damon, my so-called best friend and business partner, orchestrated my downfall. My younger self had been blinded by love, by trust. He'd been too focused on building the company, on creating a future for Evelyn and himself to see the vipers circling. But now, I saw everything. Every lie, every hidden motive, every carefully laid trap. I knew their weaknesses, their ambitions, their fears, and I knew how to use them. I got out of bed, the springs groaning in protest. I needed a plan. I needed to move fast. I wouldn't waste this second chance. This time I wouldn't be the victim. This time I would be the one in control. I looked in the cracked mirror above the sink. My reflection was younger, softer, but my eyes, they held a cold fire that wasn't there before. The first step was simple. Secure the company. Damon's plan had been to slowly dilute my shares, using a series of shell corporations and legal loopholes until he had majority control. He'd used my trust, my focus on the creative side of the business to blindside me. He thought I was too naive, too obsessed with the product to notice the financial maneuvering. He was wrong, or rather, he had been wrong. This time I knew exactly what to look for. I spent the next few weeks working tirelessly, poring over financial records, legal documents, and shareholder agreements. I found the shell corporations, the hidden clauses, the subtle shifts in power. It was all there, laid out like a roadmap to my own destruction. But this time I was driving. I started quietly buying up shares, using a network of contacts I'd cultivated over the years, contacts I'd previously considered too minor, too unimportant to bother with. Contacts who, unlike Damon and Evelyn, valued loyalty and long-term relationships over quick profits and fleeting power. I used every penny I had, every favor I could call in, every ounce of goodwill I'd built up. It was a gamble, a massive risk, but I had nothing to lose. I'd already lost everything once. While I was rebuilding my defenses, I watched Evelyn. I watched her play the part of the loving, supportive girlfriend. I listened to her complaints about my lack of ambition, her subtle hints about wanting a more secure future. The words were the same, the tone was the same. But this time I heard the calculation behind them. I saw the hunger in her eyes, the insincerity in her smile. She started mentioning Jordan Beckett more frequently. Jordan was a rising star at a rival firm, a man known for his ruthless ambition and cutthroat tactics. He was everything I supposedly wasn't: aggressive, flashy, and obsessed with status. Evelyn spoke of him with thinly veiled admiration, comparing him to me in ways that were meant to sting. "He's so driven, Logan. He knows what he wants, and he goes after it. He's already a senior executive, and he's only a few years older than you. He understands the importance of networking, of making the right connections." Each comment was a carefully placed knife, twisting in the wound she thought she'd already inflicted. But the wound wasn't there anymore. It was replaced by a cold, hard determination. The day she finally left, it played out almost exactly as I remembered. We were having dinner at a small, quiet restaurant, one I had chosen, knowing she'd find it unimpressive. She'd been distant all evening, her attention constantly drifting to her phone. Finally, she put it down, took a deep breath, and looked at me with a carefully rehearsed expression of regret. "Logan," she began, her voice soft. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I let her speak, watching her, listening to the lies pour out of her mouth. The same excuses, the same justifications, the same carefully crafted performance. "You're a good man, Logan, but you're not ambitious enough. I need a man who can give me the life I deserve, a man who can provide security and status. I've met someone else, someone who understands my needs, my aspirations." It was Jordan, of course. She didn't say his name, but she didn't need to. I already knew. In the past, this moment had shattered me. I'd begged, pleaded, argued. I'd offered to change, to become the man she wanted. I'd been desperate to hold on to her, to keep the future I'd imagined. This time I simply nodded. "I understand," I said, my voice calm, emotionless. She looked surprised, taken aback by my lack of reaction. She'd expected a fight, a scene, a display of the weakness she despised. She'd expected me to crumble. I hope we can still be friends," she stammered, clearly uncomfortable with my composure. "Of course," I said, offering a small, tight smile. "I wish you all the best, Evelyn." And I meant it. I wished her all the best in her new life, her new relationship, her new employer. Because the rival firm where Jordan Beckett worked, the firm she thought was her ticket to the top, I now owned it. The acquisition had been finalized just days before. It had been a complex, risky maneuver involving a series of leveraged buyouts and strategic partnerships. I'd used my knowledge of the future, of the market trends, of Jordan Beckett's own weaknesses, to pull it off. It was a masterstroke, a move that would have made even Damon proud if he'd known about it. But he didn't. Neither did Evelyn. They were still playing their little game, thinking they were in control, while I was quietly rewriting the rules. Evelyn left the restaurant, her head held high, convinced she'd made the right decision. I watched her go, a faint smile playing on my lips. The game had begun. And this time, I was holding all the cards. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I finalized the acquisition of Beckett's firm, making sure to keep my involvement as quiet as possible. I wanted to savor the moment when Evelyn and Jordan realized who they were actually dealing with. I wanted to see the look on their faces. I started making changes at the company, subtle at first, but with a clear direction. I promoted people who were loyal and competent, people who had been overlooked or sidelined by Beckett's aggressive, self-serving management style. I implemented new policies, new strategies, all designed to streamline operations and increase profitability. And most importantly, I started tightening the screws on Jordan Beckett. I knew Jordan's weaknesses. I knew about his shady deals, his inflated expense reports, his tendency to take credit for other people's work. I knew about his gambling debts, his mistress, his precarious financial situation, all the things Evelyn, blinded by his charm and his carefully crafted image, had chosen to ignore. I started by assigning him to a series of increasingly difficult and ultimately pointless projects. I gave him impossible deadlines, demanding detailed reports, and micromanaged every aspect of his work. I made sure he was constantly under pressure, constantly scrutinized, constantly aware of his own inadequacy. I knew it was petty, perhaps even cruel, but I couldn't help myself. This was the man who had helped steal my company, who had celebrated my downfall, who had taken the woman I loved. He deserved to suffer. And I was going to enjoy watching him squirm. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Evelyn. I saw the pictures she posted on social media, the carefully curated images of her glamorous new life. The expensive dinners, the designer clothes, the lavish parties. She was living the dream, or so she thought. But I also saw the cracks starting to appear. I saw the forced smiles, the strained conversations, the growing tension between her and Jordan. I saw the way her eyes darted around the room, constantly searching for someone more important, more influential, more useful. She was starting to realize that Jordan Beckett wasn't the golden ticket she'd thought he was. He was a fraud, a climber, a man on the verge of collapse, and she was tethered to him, her own ambitions sinking with his. The day Evelyn walked into my office was a day I'd been anticipating for a long time. She'd called ahead, requesting a meeting, her voice hesitant, uncertain. She hadn't given a reason, but I knew why she was there. She wanted to see me, to see what I'd become. She wanted to see if she'd made a mistake. I'd made sure the office was perfect. It was the same office Jordan Beckett had occupied before the acquisition, the office he'd lorded over, treating his subordinates like dirt. Now it was mine. I'd redecorated, of course. Gone were the ostentatious displays of wealth, the garish artwork, the oversized desk that screamed insecurity. The new decor was understated, elegant, powerful. It spoke of quiet confidence, of genuine success, not the desperate striving of a man trying to prove something. I was sitting behind the desk, reviewing some reports, when my assistant, a young woman named Sarah, whom I'd promoted after firing Beckett's sycophantic secretary, buzzed me. "Miss Monroe is here to see you, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice professional, but with a hint of amusement. She knew the story, of course. Everyone in the company did. "Send her in," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Evelyn walked in, and for a moment we just stared at each other. She looked different. The confident, almost arrogant air she'd carried when she left me was gone. She looked tired, stressed, her makeup a little too heavy, her smile a little too forced. The designer dress she wore couldn't hide the lines of worry around her eyes, the slight slump of her shoulders. "Logan," she said, her voice a little shaky, you look well." "Thank you, Evelyn," I replied, gesturing to a chair in front of the desk. "Please, sit down." She sat, her movements stiff, awkward. She looked around the office, taking in the changes, her eyes widening slightly. This is impressive," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It is," I agreed, leaning back in my chair. "The company's doing very well." I heard," she stammered. "About the acquisition. I didn't realize—" She trailed off, her eyes searching mine, looking for any sign of anger, resentment, anything she could use to gauge her position. She found nothing. My expression was carefully neutral, my gaze steady, unreadable. "You didn't realize that you'd left me for a man who would soon be working for me?" I finished for her, a slight smile playing on my lips. Her face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Then, the door to the office opened, and Jordan Beckett walked in. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw Evelyn sitting there, facing me. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his voice a little too loud, a little too confident. "I just wanted to update you on the Peterson account." He hadn't even bothered to knock. He was still acting like he owned the place, still clinging to the illusion of power. It was pathetic. "Ah, Jordan," I said, my voice smooth. "Perfect timing. Come in. You remember Miss Monroe, don't you?" Jordan's face turned a shade of red that clashed horribly with his expensive suit. He looked from Evelyn to me, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before my eyes. Of course," he stammered. "Miss Monroe, it's a pleasure to see you again." Evelyn didn't reply. She just stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. "Jordan has been working very hard on the Peterson account," I said, turning my attention back to Evelyn. "He's been instrumental in securing their business." It was a lie, of course. Jordan had nearly lost the Peterson account through his incompetence and arrogance. I'd had to step in personally to salvage the situation, but I wanted to see how he would react, how he would try to maintain his charade in front of Evelyn. Jordan, predictably, seized the opportunity. "Yes," he said, puffing out his chest. "It's been a challenging project, but I'm confident we'll exceed their expectations." I let him talk, let him spin his web of lies, watching Evelyn's face as she slowly, painfully, began to understand the truth. She was seeing Jordan for who he really was, a weak, insecure man, desperately clinging to a position he didn't deserve. And she was seeing me, perhaps for the first time, for who I really was, the man she had underestimated, the man she had betrayed, the man who now held her future, and the future of the man she had chosen over me in his hands. "Well," I said, finally cutting Jordan off mid-sentence, "I'm sure Miss Monroe doesn't want to be bored with the details of the Peterson account. Jordan, I'll need those reports on my desk by the end of the day. And make sure they're accurate this time." The dismissal was clear, the tone dismissive. Jordan, deflated, mumbled a "yes, sir," and practically fled the office. I turned back to Evelyn, who was staring at the closed door, her face ashen. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what can I do for you, Evelyn?" Evelyn finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Regret, certainly. Confusion, definitely. And something else. A flicker of the ambition that had driven her away in the first place. "Logan," she began, her voice hesitant. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I replied, my voice still neutral. I wasn't interested in apologies, in explanations, in excuses. I'd heard them all before, and they meant nothing. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her eyes pleading with me to understand, to forgive. "Yes, you did," I agreed, my tone flat. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. "I didn't realize—" She started again, then stopped, shaking her head. "I was so focused on what I thought I wanted that I didn't see what I had." "What did you have, Evelyn?" I asked, leaning forward slightly, my gaze piercing. I wanted to hear her say it. I wanted to hear her admit the truth, not just to me but to herself. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. "You," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had you, and I threw it away." "You threw away loyalty, trust, and love," I corrected her, my voice hardening slightly. "You chose ambition, status, the illusion of a better life. You chose Jordan Beckett." The mention of his name seemed to break her. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. He's not what I thought he was," she choked out. He's a liar, a cheat. He's losing everything." "And you're afraid you'll lose everything with him," I finished for her, my voice devoid of sympathy. She didn't deny it. She just nodded, her body shaking with sobs. For a moment I felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but it was quickly replaced by a cold satisfaction. This was the woman who had broken my heart, who had betrayed my trust, who had walked away without a second thought. She deserved this. She deserved to feel the pain, the uncertainty, the fear that she had inflicted on me. "I'm sorry, Logan," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong about you, about everything." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city skyline. The view was spectacular, a testament to the success I had achieved. A success she had no part in. "Apologies are meaningless, Evelyn," I said, my back to her. "Actions are what matter, and your actions spoke very clearly." "Is there anything I can do?" she pleaded, her voice desperate. "Anything to make things right?" I turned back to face her. Her face was streaked with tears, her makeup ruined, her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. She looked lost, broken, defeated. "There's nothing you can do," I said, my voice firm. "The past is the past. We can't change it. We can only learn from it." But what about us?" she asked, a flicker of hope in her eyes. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no lingering affection, just indifference. "There is no us, Evelyn," I said, my voice cold. "There never was. There was only you and your ambition, and you made your choice." She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend my words. She had expected me to be angry, to yell, to berate her, but she hadn't expected this complete and utter lack of emotion. "But I love you," she whispered, her voice trembling. It was a lie, of course. She loved the idea of me, the idea of the man she thought I could become. She loved the security, the comfort, the future I could have provided. But she didn't love me. "No, you don't," I said, shaking my head. "You love what I represent. And now that I represent something different, something more appealing, you think you can come back. But it doesn't work that way." She stood up, her legs unsteady. She looked around the office, at the symbols of my success, at the evidence of her misjudgment. I understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She turned to leave, her shoulders slumped, her head bowed. "Evelyn," I said, stopping her at the door. She turned back, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I should thank you," I said, a faint smile playing on my lips. "If you hadn't left, I might still be the fool who loved you. I might still be blind to the truth, still trapped in a life that was going nowhere. You set me free. You gave me the motivation I needed to become the man I am today." Her face crumpled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just nodded, her eyes filled with tears, and then she walked out, closing the door softly behind her. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a sense of closure. The chapter was closed. The book was finished. I had my revenge, not through cruelty or malice, but through my own success. I had risen above the betrayal, above the pain, above the woman who had tried to destroy me. I turned back to my desk, to the work that awaited me. There were deals to be made, companies to be acquired, an empire to be built. I had a future to create, a future that was finally, truly My own, and Evelyn Monroe had no place in it. Damon's downfall was swift and brutal. I didn't even have to lift a finger, really. All I did was anonymously send a package to the right investigative journalist, a package filled with evidence of his fraudulent activities, his illegal schemes, his blatant disregard for the law. The story broke like a thunderclap, dominating the headlines, destroying his reputation, and wiping out his fortune. He was arrested, charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. He lost his company, his house, his cars, everything. He even lost his wife, who, unsurprisingly, had a similar taste for the finer things in life as Evelyn. I watched it all unfold with a detached sense of satisfaction. It wasn't personal, not anymore. It was just business. He had tried to play the game, and he had lost. I had warned him, in my previous life, about his reckless behavior, his unethical practices. He had laughed it off, calling me naive, a Boy Scout. Now he was paying the price. I never spoke to Damon again. There was no need. He sent me a message from prison, a rambling, incoherent rant filled with accusations and threats. I didn't bother to respond. He was irrelevant, a ghost from a past I had left behind. My focus was on the future, on building my empire, on expanding my reach. I became known for my sharp business acumen, my ruthless efficiency, and my unwavering integrity. I was a paradox, a man who played hard but played fair. I was respected, feared, and admired. And I was alone. I didn't date. I didn't socialize. I didn't have time for anything that wasn't directly related to my work. I had built a wall around myself, a wall of success and power, to protect myself from ever being hurt again. It was a lonely existence, but it was a safe one. And for a long time, that was enough. Until one day, it wasn't. It wasn't a sudden realization, but a gradual erosion of the satisfaction I'd found in my work, in my success. The thrill of the deal, the satisfaction of outmaneuvering a competitor, the quiet hum of power. It all started to feel hollow. I found myself staring out of my office window more often, not at the impressive skyline, but at the people walking below, the couples holding hands, the families laughing together, the friends sharing a meal. I saw connections, relationships, a sense of belonging that I had deliberately shut myself off from. One evening, I was working late, as usual. Sarah, my assistant, brought me a cup of coffee. She was a bright, efficient young woman, fiercely loyal and surprisingly perceptive. She'd been with me for almost 2 years now, and I'd come to rely on her more than I cared to admit. "You should go home, Mr. Hayes," she said, placing the coffee on my desk. "It's after 10. You've been here since 7 this morning." I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes. "Just a few more things to finish up," I mumbled, gesturing to the pile of documents on my desk. "Those few more things will still be there tomorrow," she said, her tone gently scolding. "You need to rest. You need to live a little." I looked up at her, surprised by her boldness. She usually maintained a professional distance, but tonight there was a genuine concern in her eyes. "I'm fine, Sarah," I said, trying to dismiss her concern. "No, you're not," she said, shaking her head. "You're a machine, Mr. Hayes. A very successful, very wealthy machine. But a machine nonetheless. You haven't taken a vacation since I started working here. You haven't even taken a weekend off. When was the last time you went on a date, or met up with friends, or did anything other than work?" Her words struck a nerve. I couldn't remember. I honestly couldn't remember the last time I'd done anything that wasn't related to business. My life had become a monotonous cycle of work, eat, sleep, repeat. I don't have time for those things," I said, my voice defensive. "You make time, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice softening. "You make time for the things that are important. And if you don't have anything in your life that's important other than work, well, that's just sad." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Think about it, Mr. Hayes," she said, looking back at me. "What's the point of all this success if you have no one to share it with?" Her words lingered in the silence long after she was gone. I stared at the coffee, the steam rising in swirling patterns, my mind replaying her question. What was the point? I had achieved everything I'd set out to do. I had rebuilt my empire, surpassed my previous success, avenged my betrayal. I had proven Evelyn and Damon wrong. I had won. But at what cost? I had sacrificed my personal life, my relationships, my happiness, all in the pursuit of revenge and success. I had become the very thing Evelyn had accused me of not being: driven, ambitious, ruthless. But in becoming that, I had lost something essential, something human. I finally left the office, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows of my car. I drove home to my empty apartment, a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, a symbol of my success, but also a symbol of my isolation. I stood on my balcony, the cold night air chilling my skin, and looked out at the sprawling cityscape. Millions of people living their lives, connected to each other in countless ways. And I was alone, separated from them by an invisible wall of my own making. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. What's the point of all this success if you have no one to share it with? I finally admitted to myself that she was right. I was lonely, I was tired, and I was ready for a change. The next day I started making changes. Small changes at first. I delegated more responsibilities to my team, freeing up some of my time. I started leaving the office at a reasonable hour. I even took Sarah's advice and booked a vacation, a 2-week trip to a remote island where I planned to do nothing but relax and disconnect from the world. But the biggest change was internal. I started to open myself up to the possibility of connection, of relationships, of letting people in. It was difficult, terrifying even, after being so guarded for so long. But I knew it was necessary. I started small. I reconnected with some old friends, people I'd pushed away in my single-minded pursuit of success. They were surprised to hear from me, but also welcoming, understanding. They knew the story, of course, everyone did, but they didn't judge me. They just accepted me, welcomed me back into their lives. I even started dating again. It was awkward, clumsy, and often frustrating. I'd forgotten how to navigate the complexities of relationships, how to be vulnerable, how to trust. But I persevered, learning from my mistakes, slowly rebuilding my confidence. I met a woman named Anna, a doctor, who had no interest in my wealth or my status. She was kind, intelligent, and independent, with a passion for helping others that I found deeply inspiring. She saw past the carefully constructed facade, past the successful businessman, and saw the flawed, vulnerable man underneath. We started slowly, cautiously, building a foundation of trust and respect. She challenged me, pushed me to be better, to be more open, more honest, more human. She helped me to dismantle the wall I'd built around myself, brick by brick, until I could finally breathe again. It wasn't easy. There were times when I wanted to retreat, to go back to the safety of my isolation. But Anna was patient, understanding, and persistent. She wouldn't let me give up on myself, on us. And slowly, gradually, I started to heal. The wounds of the past began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of hope, of possibility, of a future that was no longer defined by revenge and ambition, but by connection and love. I still worked hard, still drove myself to succeed, but it was different now. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about building something meaningful, something that would last, something I could share with the people I cared about. One day I ran into Evelyn again. It was at a charity gala, an event I would have avoided in the past. but Anna had encouraged me to attend. Evelyn was there with a new man, older, wealthier, and even more powerful than Jordan Beckett had ever been. She was dressed in a stunning gown, dripping with diamonds, her smile carefully crafted, her eyes constantly scanning the room. She saw me, and for a moment her composure faltered. She excused herself from her companion and walked over to me, her movements hesitant, uncertain. "Logan," she said, her voice soft. "You look different." "I am different," I replied, my voice calm. I introduced her to Anna, who greeted her with a genuine warmth that seemed to take Evelyn by surprise. We made small talk for a few minutes, the conversation strained and awkward. Evelyn kept glancing at Anna, then back at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and regret. "You seem happy," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I am," I replied, and for the first time I realized it was true. I was truly happy. Not because of my success, not because of my wealth, but because of the connections I had made, the relationships I had built, the love I had found. Evelyn looked at me, at Anna, and then back at the man she was with, who was now scowling at us from across the room. She seemed to realize, in that moment, the true value of what she had lost. I should go," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Goodbye, Evelyn," I said, offering her a small, polite smile. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears, and walked away. I watched her go, feeling no anger, no resentment, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of peace. I had moved on. I had found a happiness, and she was no longer a part of it. Anna slipped her hand into mine, and I squeezed it gently. I looked at her kind eyes, her warm smile, and I knew that I had finally found what I was looking for. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't success, it wasn't power. It was love, and that was everything.